On a cold Sunday morning, he passed a nurse in the hallway. "How do I get to the 14th floor?" he asked. "There's something in me I do not like. It keeps making me do things I don't want to do. I don't want to be me anymore."
You said they told you were dead, is that correct?
"They say they can change me into someone else. Put electrodes in my brain. I'm not sure I believe them," he said.
"Don't let me do it."
"I won't let you do it."
The man almost jumped on that Sunday morning 50 years ago, but he was drawn back from the edge by a doctor. This was Robert Heath, the psychiatrist who had admitted him.
We still have the feeling that we're working in the dark. We actually don't know what's going on, and the real problem is in understanding this thing here. This is perhaps the most complicated organ in the whole universe. The brain is the central integrator of all behavior.
Bob was trying to focus on the idea that there was a deficiency, an innate deficiency in that quality of pleasure, and began slowly trying to focus on where in the brain that pleasurable or those pleasurable areas might reside.
Heath was on a mission. He was searching for the seat of pleasure in the brain. He called it Hedonia. Hedonia means pleasure, and searching for the brain's pleasure center would later get him into great trouble. So much so that he was written out of history and forgotten. But 30 years later, the idea of going into the brain to cure the mind arose again. Today, the most ambitious neurosurgeons are targeting a broad range of different brain diseases with neuromodulation.
Depression is going to be the first huge public health problem that is addressed with neuromodulation. Addiction, obesity, and opioid abuse. Tourette works. OCD works.
If the tools are there and the brain is our new frontier, what are we going to discover?
What if we could open up the potential of the brain to learn skills and facts a lot better?
People are going to want that.
What kind of future lies ahead for the human mind? Will probing the brain bring happiness or misery?
We are exploring how brains and machines work together, right? I think the dynamic between humans and machines is ultimately changing.
You want to get into ethical quandaries. You know, you can imagine all sorts of weird applications that hopefully make people uncomfortable.
What kind of legacy would these grand ambitions leave behind?
There are explorers, conquistadores in science, and that's who they are. Some of them discover continents, some of them drown in the ocean.
It was a revolution when the Food and Drug Administration in the late 90s approved a new treatment for Parkinson's disease. They called it deep brain stimulation. Instead of giving medications, neurosurgeons would insert ultra-thin electrical wires into the brain to correct the debilitating shaking and stiffness.
No?
Okay. A little bit more room there. Here comes the fun part. Most people say that's the most painful part of the whole deal. All right, ready? You're gonna feel a little stick. Now I want you to breathe in and out slowly. 1, 2, 3, breathe. And he laughs at it. Is that all you got? Give me a second here, I'll fix that back. Okay. Now we're gonna put a little pad behind your neck here, make that a little more comfortable.
What kind of music do you want to listen to?
You don't have any early Beatles, do you?
We do. We have early Beatles. She said so.
The system is simple. A battery under the skin feeds a stimulator that delivers a current directly to neurons. To find the exact spot in the brain and the right current, the patient has to be awake during the operation.
All right, you ready? Loud noise. No, that drill bit stops itself if it hits something soft. As long as it's pushing against something hard, like bone. You having fun?
Most of the people, when they train in movement disorder, you see somebody who's shaking, you see a funny walk, you see eyelids closing too much, a neck twitching, you see a tic. Why does that happen? Why is this movement happening?
The brain is amazing and beautiful and the most complex object in the known universe. There are 100 billion neurons, each with an average of 1,000 connections to other neurons. And so the complexity and connectivity of this organ, sort of dwarfs the kidney. And your brain is you. Your kidney is not you. You can take a kidney out and you're still you. But if I injure part of your brain, I take away part of you.
Let's give some background at 18.6.
The green there, that's actually noise out of your brain. It's just noise. So we often say this is like driving through Europe, okay? So as he goes through different regions of the brain, it's like when you drive through Europe, they speak different languages. And so, if you go through, Amsterdam or the Netherlands, they speak one language, and you get to the border speaks a different language when they ask you for your passport. You head into Germany, guess what? The language changes again, and then down to Italy for a little wine. But everybody's speaking different languages. Same thing, as he goes from top to bottom here, he's gonna look for the different languages, and then Dr. Barmore, who is on your right side, one of the neurologists, he's gonna move your arms and legs around with Dr. Almeida, and they're gonna see which cells are responding to movement, and that tells us about where the motor regions are in the brain.
One of the amazing things in retrospect about a guy like Bob Heath, we're talking about 1950. "65 years ago, when he was doing this every day."
We calculate our coordinates from the X-rays, make the adjustments in the various planes on the machine, then we're in a position to drill the burr holes and to lower the electrodes into place. The electrodes are carried down by means of rather stiff guides, and after they're lowered to the proper depth determined by this millimeter scale on the side here, we then clamp the wires into place, turn this back up. Now, after they're fixed that way with a plastic button, we're then in a position to do our recording and to give treatment.
And you had told me you had these voices that troubled, that caused you conflict.
Yeah.
Tell me about those.
Bob was trying to focus on this bizarre syndrome that we're calling schizophrenia. Looking for pleasure, believing, as they did, as Bob did, with the first few people who had electrodes placed, that the septal area did seem to show abnormal electrical activity, which changed when a stimulus was somehow placed there.
We'll send you home. All right. Congratulations.
See you later.
That went great.
Yeah, great.
Good job.
After hundreds of operations, surgeons began to compare notes, and something unusual came to light. Once in a while, a Parkinson's patient would react strangely and surprise everyone.
I had met this patient, many times, several times. I'd never seen her smile before, and she always just seemed pretty miserable.
And as I was turning the voltage up on the patient, the most remarkable thing happened.
Michael Oken is talking to her while we're doing this, and he says, "What are you feeling?" And she says, "I feel happy."
We had tapped into an interface in the brain between the motor and the limbic behavioral function. And when we submitted it for publication, the response was, "No, this can't be real." Well, now we know, fast forward a couple of decades forward, that this has been reproduced all around the world.
What looked to most surgeons to be an odd side effect was really a breakthrough. And in 2001, this was picked up on by an outsider. Neurologist Helen Mayberg, who had long researched the mechanisms of depression, became the first to try deep brain stimulation to understand mood.
We've been thinking about this thought experiment for a while. The most amazing thing about that first time was, in fact, nobody knew what to expect. So to actually have a patient change state in front of our eyes, it was very emotional. Because how can it not be? You just want nothing to happen bad to this patient while you indulge in testing an idea. And all of a sudden her face changes. That was the moment where I said, I don't know what this is, I don't know what we're doing, but we better figure this out, because maybe this really is the start of something.
The circuitry that controls your emotional state and the circuitry that controls your ability to move,
they're the same. And interwoven within that circuitry in the human brain are the representations for mood, how you feel, the representations for emotion, the representations for what we call associative circuits, how you think.
You're gazing from a window to life, but it's impossible for you to take part of life. And you just gazing through this milky window and see the people, what they're doing, that there is life in them, they're just take part in life. But I can't. So you're like locked in your own world. It's like a foggy dew when you try to remember when was the last time I was happy, I was lucky, I felt these feelings.
We have a pleasure if we eat something really good, and our system really immediately knows that's something good, that's something to be repeated. Hedonia is one of the key driving factors, not only of us, actually of all vertebrates. Hedonia tells you what's good for you in a not so subtle way. And hedonia is very important for sex drive, for our reproduction, romantic love, in music, and all these functions are no longer there in depression.
At this point in my life, I wouldn't say that it is alive. Life is very far away. I once read the expression cancer of soul is very likely what it means, because it destroys your soul and your feelings and your thoughts, and so you're at the point that you say, I can't bear it anymore, the pain, and I don't want to live anymore.
Well, I'm pretty much always depressed, have been since I was 9. I become very isolated, kind of like sliding down into the bottom of a well. It's very, very dark. There's no one there. There's really no light. I feel that I have no contribution to make whatsoever, that I'm basically worthless, so why even make the attempt to get out?
Many of these patients are basically stuck without options. They live in a purgatory that, to me, is indescribable. They don't respond to therapy or any of the multitude of drugs. They've failed ECT. Those patients are at the end of the line.
I get away with it because my husband is, he's a really good man. He takes good care of me.
As a resident, I met a very, very desperate patient. He was a government employee and he was afflicted with a horrible destiny. He had repetitive depression, and I met him at his 7th episode. And he came to the clinic in Bern, where I worked at the time, and he said, "Oh, doctor, it's depression striking again. Please, 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 don't make me participate in group therapy again," which I thought was an odd thing. I said, okay, I will talk to my boss about that. I went to the boss, and the boss said, oh yeah, this is a cathartic moment in the life of this patient. He shows some aggression. This aggression is good, aggression against his depression. We need to use it. He will have group therapy. What doesn't kill a patient will make him stronger. This was a particularly stupid statement because this patient hanged himself 6 weeks later. It was a destiny which impressed me tremendously. And I'm not saying anything against psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is very useful in every patient. We couldn't get at depression without psychotherapy, but sometimes patients need more. And I like action in psychiatry. I like that something is going on. I dislike months and years of talking with patients about the same thing. If they suffer so hard, something needs to happen.
When I was chief of psychiatry in New York State, the census then in all of the New York State hospitals approached 90,000 people. 90,000 people permanently assigned to various mental hospitals. It was a massive, massive thing. There was essentially nothing to do so far as treatment was concerned. There were some of those who were lobotomized. There was electroshock, and we would sometimes give them 2, 3, 4 a day. Enough to it that they were reduced to slobbering pieces of protoplasm. There really was no treatment. Those days, how does one put it? Those people were locked up and forgotten. And we were all young and vigorous and wishing we could do better.
Robert Heath was making his way in New York, the promised land of American psychiatry, with a practice on Park Avenue and tenure track at Columbia University. He caught the eye of an ambitious dean who wanted to make Tulane University a Harvard of the South. Robert Heath dazzled the dean, and Tulane offered the young man the keys to a kingdom of his own. Chief of both neurology and psychiatry at just 34. It was unheard of.
This would have been the summer of 1952, 53. If you were sitting in a room and you wanted to, in your mind, conjure up the most magical person, good-looking, filled with authority, filled with all sorts of confidence. Who was that man? That was Dr. Heath. He's head of psychiatry and neurology. First word that comes to mind is imperious.
Gregory Peck in kind of appearance, very glamorous and suave. And he took me on a tour of his lab, which was, I felt, really amazing for an undergraduate to have him spend time doing that. And he started to talk about what was going on in that lab.
He already, from what I could tell, was wondering how he might transpose that whole concept of behavioral anhedonia lack of pleasure, to neurophysiology, and began slowly trying to focus on where in the brain that pleasurable or those pleasurable areas might reside.
He realized this is not an emotional problem, this is a brain disease. I mean, most psychiatrists looked at it as, oh, well, they're just, you know, they have a psychotic break. But Heath was trying to figure out what happens in the brain.
This is the old charity hospital in New Orleans. Robert Heath went here every day to walk the halls of the 3rd floor and make his rounds. He wanted his psychiatric ward to be the most modern in the country. Today, the hospital is abandoned and plans are being made to tear it down.
I think they did it first with cats, a couple of animals, to show that there was some abnormal electrical activity down there when one put a wire down deep.
You'd walk through the hall some mornings and there'd be 6 rhesus monkeys sitting in chairs with little wooden collars around their neck with wires hanging out of their head in the hall. So it was a pretty exotic thing for a medical student to see all that.
But ultimately, of course, began using that on humans.
That sound we're hearing now is coming from the normal brain. In some ways, it's comparable to the distant roar of a 4-engine plane. This is a mentally ill patient. Notice the difference in the sounds coming from his brain. It sounds like a plane with its engines misfiring. In a way, that's just what's happening.
A dramatic approach, to say the very least, to insert these microelectrodes deep into the brain and have them stay there for periods of time, measure and stimulate, and we bought into it because it was new ideas, it was thrilling.
Just the fact that you could record what was going on in the brain and talk to the patient, and then you could stimulate an area of the brain and have him tell you how it changed his feelings. I thought that was fascinating.
I didn't know whether I was at the frontier of American science and he was bringing me there, or I was doing experiments on humans that had no right to be going on.
The next patient, she will be known as P6 with her father.
Schizophrenia was always Robert Heath's big passion. He called it the most disabling disorder in all of medicine, robbing young people of their lives and crippling whole families with its massive stigma. He was sure he would succeed in curing schizophrenia. And even if it is one of the most complex disorders of the human mind, the task perfectly matched his ambition for greatness.
How is your mood?
It's so hard to say.
Tell me as best you can what it's like.
Mediocre.
Mediocre? Uh-huh. 60 pulses. As bad as ever.
I'm not sure I do right now. I feel a little wiggly and...
Well, you look like you're really... What are you laughing about?
I don't know.
Huh?
What are you doing something to me?
Wait, what makes you think we're doing something?
I have no idea.
Huh?
What in the hell are you doing?
Well, tell me what you thought.
Maybe you're stimulating some goodie place.
A goodie place? What makes you say we're stimulating a goodie place?
Well, I want to be laughing.
Somehow the word got out that what's her name had shown this huge response, and everybody was running around as if they were on dope. You know, eureka! Look what we've discovered. It was like that. This has happened. It looks like we've done it. And they went on to do other patients, of course.
I guess you'd say that I'm really disturbed about feeling good.
Because it's foreign.
It's completely foreign.
What you've said is that you've never felt this way in your life. Felt this good in your life?
No, I've just been trying to pick out something, trying to find something in my background that I can relate it to. But I can't.
Does it have any bad effects on you?
No bad effects at all. If I can buy one, I'll take one home from you.
You want to take one home?
Yeah, take one home. Be glad to.
Now I can write my name so I can read it, and it seems like I can do anything now. And some things a 70-year-old can't do, but he thinks he can. When he thinks he's still 20, and then he looks in the mirror and thinks, who's that old guy looking at me? I don't think he can do this anymore. Essential tremor, as soon as you put your hands out, they start shaking right away. Now, mine, I put them out and they just know. And I feel like almost normal again.
Sie wissen, das ist eine experimentelle Studie. Wir können nicht garantieren, dass Sie jetzt respondieren, dass alles wunderbar ist. Das ist, glaube ich, auch keine realistische Erwartung. Aber die Wahrscheinlichkeit, dass Sie signifikant profitieren können, ist groß, wenn wir jetzt die Patienten sehen, die wir bereits behandelt haben. Ich hoffe sehr, dass das nächstes Jahr wieder funktioniert, so wie früher. Die Wahrscheinlichkeit ist relativ groß.
Wie ist es aktuell mit der Familie, mit den Eltern? Wie ist der Kontakt da?
Schwierig. Also zu meinem Vater habe ich seit meinem Suizidversuch dieses Jahr gar keinen Kontakt mehr.
Mhm.
Seit dem Suizidversuch? Mhm. Warum ist das ein Anlass, keinen Kontakt mehr zu haben?
Weil er mir Schuld gibt, dass ich ihm sowas antun kann. Und von dem her meidet er jetzt den Kontakt zu mir.
Hm.
Catherine, today is the week 24 of the open stimulation, and although we'll see you next week again, today is the primary endpoint of the big day. Just let me just show the ratings. Today is May 22nd. How are you doing?
Good. I am happy more than not. I experience joy in almost everything I do. There's always something about it that, even if it's just the fact that I'm doing it, I usually find some kind of joy in it. I enjoy my life. Never have before. Never really had a life before. So it's kind of like, you know, well, as Jim calls me, Catherine 2.0. You improved on the old one.
We've always had this feeling. Can you tell me any more about them?
Well, I can't do anything. I mean, I know everything that's going on, but it seems like I can't be a part of it.
You can't be a part of it. You feel like you don't belong?
Yeah, I didn't want to leave home. And it seems like the other part of the world was just something that I didn't belong in, some kind of a dream or something.
Do you think you feel just as bad now as you did before the operation?
Yes.
Now the treatment is started. She's receiving a very minute amount of current. Actually, it amounts to only 0.005 of an ampere delivered to a very specific region in the brain.
But I don't like to feel me.
You don't like to feel me?
No.
Tell me what you wanted
I
to do.
just want to hit something.
You want to hit something, huh?
Yeah, but I wouldn't feel any different after I hit. I just want to get something and tear it up.
You want to get something and tear it up, huh? Mm-hmm. You feel like you want to tear it up?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Take it so I won't.
Take it so you won't. Now the current has been reduced. She's now receiving 0.004 of an ampere, and of course is changing in behavior. And look at that smile you got now.
Why does that make me do that? I don't like to do that.
You really told me off, remember?
I know I did, but I couldn't help it. I didn't have any control over it. It just come in, I was just thinking things and I couldn't help it.
Well, tell me what you were thinking.
I wanted to slap your face because I thought I was dying. I wanted to cut that off. And I was mad at you because you wouldn't tell them to.
Because I wouldn't tell them.
And I saw her and I said, what was the stimulator put in for? And she said, I was suicidally depressed. And I said, did it work? And she said, I'm alive and I'm not depressed. It's what saved my life. I'm thinking, oh, Lord, this stuff really did work.
Hi, how are you feeling?
I'm just fine.
Good. How's everything at home with that big girl of yours?
Oh, she's just fine. She's a handful sometimes, though.
We're just beginning to make some correlations between the mind and brain activity, and we hope this will be helpful, particularly in treating the major mental illnesses, the psychoses. So in the not-too-distant future, it won't be necessary to count on one person out of 10 spending some time in a mental hospital. Those of us working in the field even dare to hope that the mental hospital will be a thing of the past.
I remember it vividly. Bob's weekend place in Mississippi, a small place that he'd go to and take some people down and do some fishing, was called Hedonia. The little farm. He called it Hedonia.
This is where he's talking about whether it's an autoimmune disease, schizophrenia. So I guess they're still considering that as a possibility.
I remember very distinctly trying to get a feeling for what his relationship was to his son, and I never knew, never could tell. He never became a presence. That's what I wondered whether he survived, because Bob Heath worked night and day. Night and day. The lab was open all the time. His lights were on all the time. He worked every weekend.
So, it's amazing coming back here and looking through some of the stuff in the office and seeing how much of it there is, and then the whole concept of his research kind of being lost in a way, and then the same sort of procedures that he did back in the 60s and 70s is now being rediscovered by modern physicians. And it's like, wow, it's all here, and he's got all these papers and all these citations. And what happened to all of his stuff? There were like probably hundreds of different papers with his name on them.
After a few positive results in the operating room, Heath mounted a larger trial. He carefully selected 22 young men and women with schizophrenia facing a lifetime in mental institutions.
Several years? You've been having these voices all during that time?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. And what do the voices say to you?
I don't even answer them back.
You don't answer them back?
Mm-mm.
Why don't you answer them back?
I was scared.
Heath's group worked for 2 years, operating, following up with the patients, gathering data, and analyzing how the treatment affected each one of them.
How long have you been working for this engineering company you're with now?
11 months.
You like that job?
Oh, yeah. There's no horn wake, and the people are very nice and everything. I ain't been in trouble or anything.
How about the symptoms that were so terribly distracting?
Oh, no, I don't have any of those anymore.
Hallucinations?
No, no.
And your rageful impulses where you...
Oh, no, none of those anymore at all.
Uh-huh. How you been getting along?
Well, I've been doing wonderful, and I don't have any more trouble like I did have, and I don't have those dreams, and I don't have those voices, and I have more control of myself. It's just so much different from the way I was and the way I am now that it's unexplainable, really. You can't really explain it.
When it appeared that the treatment helped half of the patients, Heath decided to break the news in an invitation-only seminar where he presented everything for a select group of leading peers. These men were some of the most respected names in psychiatry, and they did not approve of his methods. They suspected that the patients got so much attention and care that the apparent effect was placebo.
Most of the discoverers are nerds, by the very nature of the work. In contrast to the thick lens, the dirty shirt, and, Bob was the anti-nerd. First, he was a great tennis player, a great golfer, absolutely at home with himself socially.
He was very good at raising money. And it was usually a sort of a charismatic interaction with a wealthy family or a foundation or something like that.
He was one of these guys you couldn't stay away from. It was just, how can I put it, a temple of charisma. The kind of guy I think that many other academic people, from what I've seen around, would wish they were. Some of them I know were waiting for him to win the Nobel Prize. That's how highly he was thought of in those days.
Oh yes, that's a Nobelist. He put together neurochemistry and neurophysiology.
And I think some of them hated Bob for that. I think it's the simplest, most primitive kind of thing that happens with we human beings. It's called jealousy.
I fell in love with him, actually, as the simplest way to say about it. I wanted to become him. which was common, not uncommon, because he was so charismatic and mysterious in a way. In spite of his apparent confidence, I got the feeling that he was working at being right.
We know a lot about how the brain works now, and we know a lot more about what deep brain stimulation is doing. And so I would say the days of we don't really know what we're doing, but it obviously works, I think that's an exaggeration. But I certainly wouldn't say, you know, we are extremely sophisticated and we understand every aspect of what we're doing, because that's not true either.
You're doing a procedure in the most important part of the human body that control emotion, decisions, cognition, everything. And we're still investigating Gilles de la Tourette, obsessive compulsive disorder, epilepsy, depression, and other severe illnesses where there is a chance and hopefully it will help some patients.
Haben Sie auch Ängste in Bezug auf die Operation?
Würde, glaube ich, lügen, wenn ich Nein sagen würde, ja.
Können Sie sagen, vor was genau?
Vor dem Eingriff an sich.
Was am Eingriff, was stellen Sie sich als besonders belastend oder erschreckend vor dabei?
Ich glaube eher der Gedanke, dass da jetzt am Gehirn herum operiert wird.
Mhm.
We started a study on obsessive compulsive disorder, and the day that our study went onto the NIH website, she called us. She had contamination fears.
She knew, when you talked to her, she knew that this was illogical. When her husband goes out to the store, he has to buy all of the groceries, and then there's a transfer that happens at the door of their garage where he opens the cereal box and pours the cereal, just like in an operating room when you transfer something sterilely, pours the cereal out of the sterile thing into her sterile container and then into the house, and then throw away the dirty containers that had been in the grocery store.
He comes home from work, and because now he's been out in the contaminated world, he has to go through a decontamination procedure to get into his own home, or his wife can't handle it. And so he literally drives his car into the garage and closes the garage door, strips naked, takes a shower in the bathroom at the entrance, and then is allowed by his wife to come into the house naked and clean. But to make a long story short, you know, I have pictures of her now riding horses with her daughter, and you know, she really got her life back. For OCD at least, it's become clear that it's that posterior superior border of the nucleus accumbens where we get our most potent beneficial effect. So, you know, the nucleus accumbens is the final common pathway for pleasure, right, in the human brain. It lights up when, in the functional MRI scanner, when you give someone chocolate, or if you tell someone to have a sexual fantasy, or you give a drug addict his drug of choice. You know, that's the part of the brain that lights up most reliably with reward.
He looked like a sweet blonde boy, but he was confined in a mental hospital, heavily drugged and tied to a bed. His parents found Robert Heath while searching for a way to get their son out of hospital and give him some kind of life.
David was obviously retarded. I don't know what his IQ is, but it's probably around 70. He was incarcerated in the state mental hospital because of his violence. He could not be around other people. He was considered the most violent patient they'd ever had in the state mental hospital. That's saying a lot.
It was a mental health counseling appointment for David and all the family to be there who could be there. And I remember we were just all sitting there like this in the waiting room, and it was directed at me and just into the wall, and I'm gonna kill her, and everybody heard it, everybody, and the doctors come running out, and they took him. And my mother cried and cried and cried and cried. From that day on was the beginning of him in and out of the home and being taken for periods of time, or then eventually the confinement into Mandeville.
When he's home, I'm always deathly afraid that he'll harm someone away from the house. We all know that he self-inflicts wounds upon himself.
Heath used a new version of his brain pacemaker. Donald Richardson was the surgeon who implanted the device in David's cerebellum. From the back of his neck, it would send gentle pulses through to the damaged emotional structures in David's brain.
After he got over the surgery and the stimulator was adjusted, he was able to leave the mental hospital and move back home with his parents. He got a job working in a Burger King or someplace like that, cleaning up, and was totally pacified.
Do you remember how you felt when you were doing all of that fighting? Do you remember the fight with when you attacked your dad and your mother?
Yeah, I remember that.
But that seemed to be under control again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, it was hard for them to see such great pain and suffering, and to know that he's been helped. What do you think about it, David?
He's done good.
He's doing real good.
Only Dr. had to take care of me.
Well, we try.
You tell Dr. Richardson, you planted a real good device in him. Tell him what happened when I took you to Washington, D.C.
Security guards over there grabbed me up line.
What line? Where was I taking you?
I was in the White House.
Oh, really?
Yes, and what happened?
Service got going.
Why did they pull you out, and what did they do to you?
Come on, take me there.
Thought you had a knife or a bomb on you or something? What you do is you put it on AM and turn it as low frequency as it'll go, and you'll pick up the magnetic output from the stimulator. Did you hear it? That was it. Burp. That's it. It only stimulates a very short period of time, every 5 minutes.
Everything is going great, and Heath is enjoying the best of all worlds. Until the arrival of the 1970s. The counterculture was booming then. It was a time for ripping down authorities. Popular art and films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest show mental institutions in a new and crude way. The public mood is turning against all of psychiatry, and the exclusive, privileged world of doctors is being questioned. This turmoil reaches all the way to Congress, where Ted Kennedy put psychosurgery on trial. Heath is summoned to explain his work. Rivals in his field accuse him of being the devil in a white coat.
I was very embarrassed for Dr. Heath. I didn't realize really the antipathy most of the field at that time had for Heath. He had overly blessed his luck.
The Gregory Peck of the 1950s becomes a crazy mad scientist planting electrodes in people's brains, turning them into human pincushions.
People had the idea that he just stuck electrodes in everybody's head.
This also happened, remember, at a very strange political time in this country. And as one goes along in time, one begins to realize how important sociopolitics is, not just in the way countries are run, but in the way science is done.
Kennedy asks, is this not opening the door to mind control?
Yes or no?
Heath does what he can, but when they're done on the Hill, psychosurgery is dead. And Robert Heath, who spoke against lobotomy in the 1950s, is now being cast as a lobotomist. To Heath, it's all a waste of time. He went back to the lab to continue his work. He saw the upheaval as a minor blow. But what came out next would change everything. In his quest for pleasure, it was natural for Heath to study sexuality. Experiments were carried out in the lab where he would measure sexual arousal in patients. And then an opportunity arose that played right into his hunt for pleasure. A young man was admitted and diagnosed as chronically suicidal and depressed. During therapy, he disclosed how he wanted to be free of his homosexuality. At the time, homosexuality was registered in the DSM, the list of mental illnesses. It was a time when parents took their sons to get shock treatment to their testicles if they had homosexual tendencies. Heath offered the young man treatment. He saw an opportunity to see if he could change the brain's pleasure preferences.
I myself, I'm gay, as I think I mentioned to you, and Bob knew it. We didn't talk about it, because you don't talk about things like that particularly. And I'm sure there are people around that would have wanted to do that. I wouldn't want to do it now. I probably might have wanted to do it then. But it's a different time in different ways.
In those days, they thought it was that homosexuality was a pathology that should be treated like any other kind of psychiatric disorder. Unfortunately, the psychoanalysts were the worst about that. Yeah, I knew that he had turned his interest, but I didn't realize he had gone actually so far as to do a clinical study.
Electrodes were implanted in the young man's pleasure center. He had a remote control and could stimulate himself. He used it when watching heterosexual porn, and after a while he was ready to meet a woman. A 21-year-old prostitute was hired. The young man and the woman would be alone in the lab, with Heath and his technicians recording from his electrodes in another room. The young man had intercourse with the woman for the first time. The results of the study proved successful, but no one is sure what became of the young man after the study. The research was published in a scientific journal, but when it later reached the public, the reaction was brutal. Heath faced intense criticism. Times had changed, and new voices celebrating diversity were on the rise.
You can put an electrode and do stimulation to either block or drive. So if you do MRI on me and I'm in love with you and my wife said, no, this is not good, let's put an electrode to block that area, so I'm not in love with you. This is the consequence. We never went that far. It's unethical, it's not needed. This tool is too valuable to be used for these issues. You can have the atom energy to drive boats and to get electricity, and you can have it to make a bomb. Same thing. A fool with a tool is still a fool. Maybe you've heard that quote before.
Okay, so I'm beginning to get a little bit worried and a little bit uncomfortable here because we're gonna put something into the brain, we're gonna drive a circuit, and we're going to change somebody's personality. The personality changes, people become more impulsive, so we change impulsivity, well, that's probably gonna change somebody's personality. They're gonna seem a heck of a lot more impulsive in the store and on Amazon.com and in casinos. So that's changing personality, right, if we make you more impulsive. Some people, it may actually change the character of their personality, how friendly they are, whether they're angry. And we know, we published a number of years ago in our National Institutes of Health cohort that we very commonly would make people angry with certain targets in the brain and irritable. That could be interpreted as a change in personality.
I mean, I knew there was going to be change, but I didn't think that I was going to get clobbered over the head. I'd get louder and more dramatic, and if it's something that is a disturbing situation, then I start to get angry. No filter whatsoever. I don't have one. I just say whatever comes into my head. I don't even stop to think, is it going to hurt somebody? It's just, oh. And I don't hesitate to talk anymore, so.
Would you have the surgery again?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There's no question. I mean, it's a resounding yes, because it saved my life. I probably would not be alive right now if I hadn't had the surgery.
Every psychiatric treatment, be it medication, be it psychotherapy, changes factors of emotion and cognition, which are parts of personality too. And if it wouldn't do that, it wouldn't be worthwhile to do it. So yes, personality is changing, has to change when we talk about emotion and cognition. Many people don't want to have something to do with illness, depression. They want to push it away. It means weakness. Illness is weakness. You are not a full member of society. So everything that is weak perhaps reminds oneself of their own weakness. Perhaps there is a possibility, a very, very good possibility to live again and to be healed or to get better. It's not the end. I try not to put too much stress on it because I don't want to be too much enttäuscht. But for me, it's a last possibility that I could return to life. I could feel good feelings again. Could see sunlight again with my feelings, with my heart. Otherwise, I will go on as a living dead.
most of the human trials that I've been involved with were people who had just miserable lives with no hope. And we, offered them hope, and not just, oh, we hope this might work, but we had strong reasons to believe that it would work, with enough evidence, to convince an institutional review board, hey, this is worth trying. But yeah, I would say I'm probably on the aggressive side in terms of moving to human clinical trials. And so, obesity and opioid abuse are the two biggest public health problems, crises really, in the United States right now. And this one application of neuromodulation has the potential to make a huge difference in that domain. If we can do that, I think that's going to be a huge game changer.
Maybe we could fix it with some new molecular tool down the line. Am I going to stop what I'm doing until someone does that? Sorry that bothers you. Let me introduce you to a sick person. Given that what we have is safe, available, and is working, I'll take it.
What if we were soon able to modulate every aspect of the human mind? This would open a door to manipulate things that we consider sacred and essential to who we are. What if, for example, you could take away the pain of traumatic memories with an electrode?
The veteran was part of the initial, basically, attack on Iraq, which was in 1991. He was working in a tank. This battle lasted all day and, all night. If you type in on the internet, highway of death, you get images of this. And, sorry, I didn't expect this. It's a long highway littered with tanks and bodies and vehicles and pieces of this and that blown up, and it's horrifying. And what happened is that after the battle, the next day or the day after, he and his unit were sent to kind of do like a damage assessment. And that's when the most traumatic experience that basically changed this man's life occurred. He just saw these dismembered and charred bodies. And there's one particular image of a corpse, that was blackened and scarred, with the man he describes has one eye kind of partly coming out of his head. And there were flies, it was hot. Well, you'd think that the most traumatic thing about being in combat is that people are trying to kill you. But the most traumatic thing is killing other people. Within, weeks after that, he began having nightmares of his charred corpse that would actually envelop him, and he would experience it. He would feel it. He would wake up screaming and sweating, and the only thing he could think of to get rid of it was to take showers, cold showers. And he would spend like 2 hours in the shower to wash the contamination off and try to get back to sleep. And he would only sleep again for like an hour, hour and a half, and then be woken up again. He suffered with this for more than 20 years. Every day, During the surgery, he experienced positive images from his childhood. He would describe these wonderful scenes from his homeland, very colorful, and he could smell fresh bread being cooked. he would say, "Oh, wow, that feels good, Dr. Cook. Oh, leave it there, don't change it." 4 to 5 months after, initiation, he stopped having nightmares. And he's had a total of 3 since then, so that's 15 months ago.
I still take medication. I still need some medication. So I tried to stop, but I couldn't. Too many things were going on that I was angry, I was upset a lot. I just didn't feel right. So I went back on it. So it makes a difference. Medication still makes a difference. So chemically, something's going on in there that needs to be tweaked. And whatever area of the brain that's getting electrified, it's quieted the bad stuff. It was literally like being blind for 54 years and somebody turned the switch on and the whole world was there and you could see it. And wow, okay, I've been in a coma for 54 years and I'm awake and there is some cool stuff out here.
Heath was always a believer in his technology, despite the heavy criticism from his peers and the public. It turned out he was not alone. In 1977, the New York Times drops a bomb. The CIA Cold War MK Ultra program is outed. On top of the Vietnam atrocities, it now looks like government agencies are in the business of brainwashing. In the shadow of Watergate, this is the time of disclosure, and thousands of secret documents surface. Heath's name is on them.
I think he became totally seduced by 2 very, very attractive motivations. One was a great deal of money that the government offered them to do that work. And 2, their belief often that they were being patriots, that this was good and valuable to the country.
Heath was testing a new drug, bulbocapnin, a drug the Russians were also testing. This was not a drug that you wanted to test on regular patients. So Heath used inmates from Angola prison, the so-called Alcatraz of the South. He himself called it a horrendous place.
Don't you want to talk to me?
No.
Why won't you talk to me?
Tired.
Tired of me talking to you? Or are you angry at me?
The results were inconclusive. Then the CIA asked him to use his electrodes to do work on the brain's pain system. Inflict pain to patients for the military. This was where he drew the line. If I had wanted to be a spy, I would have been a spy. I'm a doctor and I practice medicine, he told the New York Times. But it was too late. He'd already fallen from grace.
Maybe that's the story of pioneers, real pioneers that aren't just want to be smart, but can walk into territory that nobody else could or would.
I think in history, frankly, there have always been people with original, unique ideas, and then rarely, when it works, become enormous heroes. Those who fail almost inevitably are seen as monsters. They were doing this for their own egos. They are monomaniacally pursuing this direction, and they should be called out for what they are. These almost sadistic creatures using patients as guinea pigs. I think ultimately that's what happened to Bob. And monomaniacal would probably be the last word in the world that I would ever use to describe a person like Bob Heath.
The irony is, of course, almost every idea he's had is going to turn out to be true.
There's an odd cloud that has tainted the legacy that resulted from a few experiments and lines of research that he conducted. Family members are concerned that the negative things that have kind of been allowed to be swept under the rug by time, brought back out, because no objective story of his career and his research could leave those out and be legitimate. You've got to include that, because that was truth. It actually happened. So as long as they know the full story.
Maybe Robert Heath was too far ahead of his time. Culture changes, and today our perspectives on the brain are radically different than 50 years ago. What used to be frightening is now, for some, an exciting opportunity. DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, invests in breakthrough technologies for national security. The agency that gave us the internet and GPS has now invested $70 million in research of deep brain stimulation.
10% of the 22 million American veterans, that fraction live with neuropsychiatric kinds of conditions. So we asked the question, is there something we can do about this? Can we develop new knowledge and new technology in order to solve this problem of neuropsychiatric illness?
Treatment also opens up the possibility of enhancement. Treating memory disorders is one of DARPA's ambitions. In Philadelphia, Michael Kahana's group is working with patients to gather data, trying to understand how memory is created. To them, memory is the key to understanding the brain.
Memories are what make us who we are. They're everything for us. Our knowledge, our experience, our identity. My grandmother became kind of my nanny as a child, and she had some profound life experiences, for example, in the Second World War, and that she never talked about them. She never said anything about them. I never heard about them, but they determined how she reacted to things. And then I find with my children here, how many years later, a half century later, that I'm reacting to them in ways that my wife or other people may find strange. And why am I reacting that way? Because of something in her memory. And I don't even know what it is, right? And it's just carried through time. I actually believe that we carry around vastly more memories, detailed memories of our past than we have access to at any one time.
That's one small step for man.
Any second now, the Berlin Wall will be...
There will be a day where people will consider elective restoration of their own thoughts. I know people will find that scary. but that's for other people to figure out. Today with my devices, I'm recording my life in a way because I'm just gonna have somebody infuse it back through a chip into my brain when I can't have those memories myself.
All technologies, okay, across the board, can be used in a variety of ways, right? They could either be used for good, right, or they could be used for ill. And that's a fundamental property of technology.
In an age when both sides have come to possess enough nuclear power to destroy the human race several times over.
In order to stay ahead of understanding that technology deeply, we have to see, all of the angles. We have to ask all of those questions. We've got to understand the technology in a very deep way.
You get better at it, and the risk gets lower and lower, and the predicted benefit gets higher and higher, and then the calculation starts to blur.
Plastic surgery didn't arrive on the scene as an aesthetic surgery. I don't mean to disappoint anyone, but it came because people had burns and people needed reconstructions and people had accidents.
And then maybe it's okay to do an operation to make someone who has a normal nose have a pretty nose. And at some point, we are going to do operations to take people who are essentially normal and make them function better, make their brains work better. It's not a question of if we're going to do that, it's just a question of when that happens.
So it's not going to be about putting the wires in people and changing them. I think it will really be this other subsection that will develop, and I'm not even going to call them out by name, but it will be that artificial intelligence, because that technology is way beyond what we can do.
Is the brain more than just a high-powered computer? If a computer did simulate a whole lifetime of experience, would we discover that the computations that the brain does are just not possible for computers? Or maybe we would discover that it's easy. I don't know. It's a great mystery.
Today, when I hear a lot of people talking about, let's say, artificial intelligence alone, I think that they're missing a bigger part of the story here. It's, we are exploring how brains and machines work together, right? I think the dynamic between humans and machines is ultimately changing.
It would certainly change human behavior in fundamental ways. Because these limbic circuits are the most powerful circuits that control our behavior. And if we take someone who's doing this in a normal way and we turn them into someone who's up here, their behavior is going to change. Their fundamental behavior is going to change. And we'd have to adjust to a whole new normal.
The commercial interest is maybe at the top of the list of something that I worry about. And if it's not done in an ethical way and the steps aren't taken correctly, if somebody, jumps the gun too soon, it can ruin it for everybody else that comes after.
The ethics become important. When is it okay to do that? Who should have access to that? So should it be wealthy people?
We've got to make the decisions right, keep the train on the tracks, and move forward. And we can be more than incremental, a step at a time. We can take some leaps. But if we're just going to capture that multi-billion-dollar market, I think we've already seen we could destroy ourselves.
We have entered a new landscape with great promises and tempting horizons. But we are also in unknown territory. The trail to discovery is open, and scientists with pioneering minds are blazing it at high speed. How do we steer our course into the future? What will we find on our journey into the brain? And are we ready for whatever that might be?